Ronan Hale had never been hungry a day in his life, and that was the problem. He stood at the edge of the frontier market, dust settling on his polished boots, watching people barter over goods he could buy without thinking. The sun beat down on rows of makeshift stalls, cloth stretched over wooden frames, barrels of grain, crates of wrinkled apples. Everything here was worn, patched, held together by necessity. He'd ridden in on impulse, bored with another day of managing land he'd inherited, signing papers for profits he didn't earn, shaking hands with men who smiled too wide and meant nothing by it. His horse, a black gelding worth more than most of these families would see in a year, shifted beneath him. Ronan steadied the reins but didn't dismount. He never stayed long in places like this. There was nothing for him here except the vague, restless feeling that had been gnawing at him for months, the sense that his entire life was a transaction he hadn't agreed to. Then he saw her. She was thin, too thin, the kind of undernourished frame that came from years of giving her portion to someone else. Her dress was faded brown cotton, mended at the elbows and hem with mismatched thread. Dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come half undone. She carried a crate of apples that looked too heavy for her, her arms trembling slightly under the weight, but her face showed nothing. No complaint, no plea for help, just focus. She set the crate down at a stall and stepped back, wiping her hands on her skirt. A man, older, round-bellied, with the florid face of someone who drank away his earnings, sat in the shade behind the stall, boots propped up on another crate. He didn't look at her. 17 baskets this week, Pa, she said quietly. Good yield on the east section. The man grunted, waving a hand dismissively. Should have been 20. You're getting slow. She didn't respond, just turned and started unloading another crate from a wagon that had seen better decades. Ronan watched, his jaw tightening. He'd seen plenty of hired workers in his time, men and women who labored on his land, who he paid fair wages and treated with basic decency because it was practical. But this wasn't labor. This was something else. The way she moved with exhausted precision, the way the man sat like a king in his broken throne, taking credit for work he clearly hadn't done. A buyer approached, a woman in a clean apron, her hair pinned neatly. She picked up an apple, examined it, then looked at the girl. These are smaller than last time, Lila. Lila. The name settled in Ronan's mind. Drought's been hard, Lila said evenly. They're sweet, though. Try one. The woman bit into the apple, chewed, then shrugged. I'll take 2 baskets, but I'm paying last month's price, not this month's. Lila's father stirred from his seat. Now hold on. Your daughter just said there's a drought, the woman cut in. Smaller apples, same price as big ones? That's charity, and I'm not running a charity. Lila's face didn't change, but Ronan saw her hands curl briefly into fists before she released them. 2 baskets, she said quietly. That's fine. Her father scowled but said nothing, slumping back into his chair. The buyer counted out coins into Lila's palm, short by at least a quarter, Ronan estimated, and walked away. Lila pocketed the money without counting it. She knew, of course she knew. Stupid girl, her father muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Could have held firm. She'd have walked, Lila said, turning back to the wagon. Then we'd have sold nothing. Don't talk back to me. Lila didn't answer. She just lifted another crate, her arms shaking again, and carried it to the stall. Ronan felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the careful detachment he'd built over years of managing land and people like pieces on a board. He'd seen injustice before. Hell, he'd probably caused some of it without knowing, insulated by wealth and distance. But watching this girl shoulder the weight of an entire orchard while her father took credit and gave nothing back, it wasn't just unfair. It was obscene. He dismounted, tying his horse to a post, and walked toward the stall. The father noticed him first, saw the quality of his coat, the shine of his boots, and sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Sir? The man said, standing quickly, brushing dust from his pants. Looking for apples? Best in the territory, grown on my land. Ronan's gaze flicked to Lila, who had gone very still, a crate balanced on her hip. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, gray, tired, wary, before she looked away. Your land, Ronan said flatly. That's right. The man puffed his chest slightly. Mercer Orchard. Been in the family 3 generations. And you work it yourself? A pause. The man's smile faltered. Well, I manage it, oversee the operation. My daughter here helps with the... She does all of it, Ronan said. Silence. Lila set the crate down carefully, as if trying to disappear into the background. Her father's face darkened. With respect, sir, I don't know what you think you saw. I saw her carry every crate. I saw you sit. I saw you take credit. Ronan kept his voice level, but there was steel underneath. I also saw her get cheated on that sale, and you did nothing. The father's jaw worked. This is family business. Then treat her like family. The words came out harder than Ronan intended. A few people at nearby stalls had stopped to listen. Lila's face had gone pale, her eyes fixed on the ground. Her father stepped forward, voice dropping to a hiss. You don't know a damn thing about my family. You ride in here on your fancy horse, throwing around judgment. Who the hell are you? Ronan could have answered, could have given his name and watched the man's face go from anger to fear to groveling apology. The Hale name carried weight in this territory, enough weight to ruin a man like this without effort. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at Lila, really looked at her. Past the exhaustion, past the worn clothes and thin frame, there was something in the set of her shoulders, the way she stood even when she clearly wanted to run. Dignity, strength, the kind that didn't come from having power, but from surviving without it. And in that moment, Ronan realized something that had been building in him for months, maybe years. He was tired of being Ronan Hale, tired of doors opening because of his name, tired of never knowing if respect was real or purchased, tired of a life where everything came easy and nothing meant anything. He wanted to know what it felt like to be nobody. You're right, Ronan said quietly. I don't know anything. He turned and walked away, leaving the father sputtering behind him. But as he untied his horse, he glanced back one more time. Lila was watching him now, confusion clear on her face. Their eyes met again, and this time he saw something else underneath the wariness. A question. Ronan didn't have an answer yet, but he was going to find one. 3 days later, Ronan Hale stopped existing. He'd spent those days making arrangements, quiet ones, the kind that didn't leave traces. He signed papers transferring temporary management of his estate to his foreman, a gruff but competent man named Garrett who'd been running the day-to-day operations for years anyway. He withdrew a small amount of cash, enough to survive, but not enough to stand out. He packed a single bag with plain clothes, the kind a drifter would wear, and then he left. No grand announcement, no explanation to the few people who might have cared. He just saddled a different horse, an old roan mare he'd bought off a farmer for cheap, and rode west toward the edge of his territory, toward the small cluster of orchards and farms where he'd seen Lila Mercer carrying the weight of her father's failures. He'd thought about this plan from every angle, testing it for flaws. It was insane, probably, definitely reckless. But the more he considered it, the more it felt like the only honest thing he'd ever done. He wanted to know if anyone could love him without his name, without his money, without the armor of status he'd worn his entire life. And if he was going to test that question, he needed to be someone else entirely. The orchard appeared as the sun started its descent, casting long shadows across rows of gnarled apple trees. It was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 15 acres, poorly maintained, with broken fences and overgrown grass between the rows. A house sat at the edge of the property, more of a shack, really, its roof patched with mismatched shingles. Ronan. No, not Ronan anymore. Cal. He'd chosen the name carefully, short, forgettable, the kind of name that didn't invite questions. Cal tied his horse to a fence post and walked toward the house. Lila was in the yard, bent over a wash basin, scrubbing clothes with raw, reddened hands. She looked up as he approached, her expression shifting immediately to caution. "Help you?" she asked, straightening. Up close, in the late afternoon light, he could see details he'd missed at the market. The shadows under her eyes, the way her dress hung loose on her frame, like she'd lost weight recently. A small scar on her chin, faded but visible. She was probably his age, mid-20s, but she carried herself like someone much older. "Looking for work," Cal said. He'd practiced this, keeping his voice rougher, his posture less certain. Heard you might need a hand with the harvest. Lila's eyebrows rose slightly. Heard from who? Folks at the market said the Mercer orchard was struggling. Her jaw tightened. We're not struggling. My mistake. He started to turn, then paused. Though if you're not struggling, you're doing all the work yourself for fun, which seems worse. She stared at him. For a moment he thought she'd tell him to leave. Then something flickered across her face. Not quite amusement, but close. What's your name? Cal. Cal what? Just Cal. She studied him, her gray eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. You running from something? Aren't we all? That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Lila wiped her hands on her apron, considering. Behind her, the door to the house opened and her father emerged, squinting into the sun. Who's this? He called out. Man looking for work, Lila said over her shoulder. Her father walked over, looking Cal up and down with undisguised suspicion. We're not hiring. I'm not asking for wages, Cal said. Just food and a place to sleep. I'll work for that. The father snorted. What kind of fool works for free? The kind who's hungry. It wasn't entirely a lie. Ronan had eaten well his entire life, but Cal was going to learn what hunger meant. The father looked at Lila. What do you think? She hesitated, and in that hesitation Cal saw the calculation. An extra pair of hands, even unskilled ones, would mean less weight on her shoulders, but also another mouth to feed, another person to manage. Trial period, she said finally. 1 week. If you can't keep up, you leave. Fair enough. Her father grunted. Fine. But you sleep in the barn and you eat after we do, and if I catch you stealing, you won't. The father held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked back into the house without another word. Lila gestured toward the barn. There's hay in the loft. I'll bring you supper later. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She picked up the wash basin, balancing it on her hip. We start at dawn. If you're not up, I'm not waking you. She walked toward the house, her back straight despite the weight she carried. Cal stood in the yard as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He'd done it. Stepped out of his life and into someone else's. No one here knew who he was. No one cared. For the first time in years, Ronan Hale felt something close to fear, and underneath that fear, anticipation. Dawn came too early and too cold. Cal woke to the sound of footsteps outside the barn, followed by the creak of the door opening. Pale light spilled across the hay-strewn floor. Up, Lila's voice called from below. We're losing daylight. He sat up, his back protesting. The hayloft wasn't soft, and the thin blanket she'd given him last night had done little against the chill. He'd slept in feather beds his entire life, temperature-controlled, with servants to stoke fires if he so much as shivered. This was different. He climbed down the ladder, his muscles stiff, and found Lila waiting with 2 wooden buckets. East section needs picking, she said, handing him the buckets. Fill these, bring them back, don't bruise the fruit. How do I not? Gently. She turned and walked out, clearly expecting him to follow. The orchard stretched out in rows, the trees heavy with apples that gleamed in the early light. Lila moved to the first tree and reached up, her movements quick and efficient. She twisted an apple free with a practiced motion, examined it briefly and placed it in her bucket. Like that, she said without looking at him. Not too hard, not too slow. You feel the give when it's ready. Cal approached a tree and reached for an apple. It came off in his hand, but wrong. The stem broke, a chunk of branch coming with it. Lila glanced over. Too hard. He tried again. This time the apple wouldn't budge. Too gentle. He tried a third time, and the apple came free cleanly. He held it up like a trophy. Don't celebrate, Lila said. You have about 300 more to go before lunch. She wasn't exaggerating. The hours blurred together. Reach, twist, place. Reach, twist, place. His shoulders burned. His hands, soft from a life of signing papers and shaking hands, began to blister. The buckets grew heavier with each trip back to the collection crates. Lila worked 3 trees for every one of his, moving with a rhythm that looked effortless, but clearly wasn't. He watched sweat bead on her forehead, saw the way she paused occasionally to catch her breath, her hand pressed briefly to her side. But she never stopped, never complained. Around midday, she finally called a break. They sat in the shade of a large tree, and Lila pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were 2 pieces of bread and a hunk of cheese, hard and slightly moldy at the edges. She cut the mold off with a knife and divided what remained. Cal took his portion, smaller than hers, he noted, though she'd been working harder. The bread was dry, the cheese sharp and crumbly. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted, and that realization hit him like a fist. "You're slow," Lila said, chewing methodically. "But you're trying. That's more than I expected." "What did you expect?" "Most drifters talk big and quit by noon." She took a drink from a canteen and handed it to him. "You haven't quit yet." The water was warm and tasted faintly metallic. He drank it anyway. "Why do you do this alone, Tasson?" Cal asked. Lila's expression closed off immediately. "That's not your business. Just seems like your father could—" "He manages," she said sharply. "The business side, contracts, sales, negotiations." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Cal let it drop. They finished eating in silence, then returned to the trees. By the time the sun began to set, Cal's hands were bleeding. Not badly, but enough that Lila noticed when he set down his last bucket. "Let me see," she said. He held out his hands, palms up. The blisters had burst, leaving raw skin exposed. Lila sighed. "Wait here." She disappeared into the house and returned with a tin of salve and strips of cloth. She took his hands, her own rough and calloused, and applied the salve with quick, impersonal efficiency. "You're not used to work?" she said. "No." "What did you do before?" Cal hesitated. "Nothing useful." She wrapped the cloth around his palms, tying it off. "Well, you're doing something useful now, even if you're terrible at it." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the complete unfamiliarity of this life, Cal smiled. Lila looked up, caught off guard by the expression. For a moment, something shifted in her face. Not warmth exactly, but a lessening of the wall she kept up. "Supper's in an hour," she said, standing. "Clean up first." She walked toward the house, and Cal watched her go. Ronan Hale had owned land, wealth, and power. He'd commanded respect with a word and changed lives with a signature. But Cal had just earned a meal and a bandage, and somehow that felt more real than anything Ronan had ever possessed. The days fell into a pattern: dawn, work, a brief meal, more work, sunset, supper, sleep. Cal learned the rhythm of the orchard, the way each tree had its own personality. This one generous, that one stubborn. He learned to read the fruit, to know by touch which apples were ready and which needed another day. His hands toughened, the blisters hardening into calluses. His body adapted, muscles he'd never used before waking up and learning their purpose. And he learned Lila. She was patient, in her way, though she never coddled him. When he made mistakes, she corrected him without softness. When he did something right, she acknowledged it with a brief nod and moved on. She worked from dawn until well past dusk, often by lamplight, mending equipment or preparing for the next day. Her father, meanwhile, did nothing. Oh, he made a show of it, sitting at the market stall, talking to buyers, counting coins. But the actual work, the labor that kept the orchard alive, fell entirely on Lila's shoulders. And now, partially, on Cal's. At supper, always a simple meal, stretched thin, her father would hold court, talking about his plans to expand, to hire more workers, to restore the orchard to its former glory. Lila would eat in silence, her eyes distant. Cal wanted to say something, to challenge the old man's delusions. But he'd learned quickly that Lila's silence was protective. Any defense of her only made things worse. One evening, about 2 weeks into Cal's time at the orchard, her father came home drunk. Cal was in the barn, mending a broken harness by lamplight, when he heard raised voices from the house. He set down his work and moved to the door. "Ungrateful, that's what you are." The father's voice, slurred and angry. everything I've done for you, and you can't even manage a simple sale. I got the best price I could. Lila's voice steady but strained. Mr. Garrett wasn't budging. You didn't push hard enough. A pretty girl like you could have smiled, convinced him. I'm not using that. A crash, something hitting the floor, shattering. Cal was moving before he thought about it, crossing the yard in long strides. He pushed open the door to find Lila standing in the kitchen, her back against the counter, while her father loomed over her. A broken plate lay scattered at her feet. Get out, her father said, turning to Cal. This is family. Step back, Cal said quietly. Something in his voice, not Cal's voice, but Ronan's, the tone he used when he expected to be obeyed, made the old man hesitate. You don't tell me what to do in my own house, he blustered, but he took a step back anyway. Go sleep it off, Yit, Cal said. You'll regret this in the morning. The father's face reddened. I'll regret. You work for me, boy. I could throw you out right now. You don't work for him, Lila said quietly. She was looking at Cal, her expression unreadable. You work for me, or I'm the one who feeds you. Her father turned to her, mouth opening, but whatever he saw in her face made him close it again. He muttered something incoherent and stumbled toward the back room, slamming the door behind him. Silence filled the kitchen. Lila knelt and began picking up the broken pieces of the plate, her hand steady despite everything. Cal knelt beside her. Let me. I've got it. Lila, I said I've got it. Her voice was firm, but when she looked at him, there was something raw in her eyes. This is my life, Cal. I know how to handle it. That doesn't mean you should have to. She held his gaze for a long moment, then returned to gathering the broken pieces. You should go, before he comes back out. Cal wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her she deserved better than this. Better than a father who took everything and gave nothing. Better than a life of endless work with no recognition. Better than being treated like a burden instead of the only thing holding this place together. But he didn't have the right. Not as Cal. Maybe not even as Ronan. So he stood and walked to the door. But before he left, he turned back. For what it's worth, he said, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Lila looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Then she looked away, a faint color rising in her cheeks. Good night, Cal, she said softly. He left, returning to the barn and the cold comfort of the hayloft. But he couldn't sleep, because somewhere in the weeks of working beside her, of watching her carry impossible weight with quiet dignity, of learning the sharp intelligence behind her tired eyes, somewhere in all of that, Ronan's experiment had stopped being an experiment. It had become something real, and that terrified him more than anything. The harvest season moved into full swing, and with it came the buyers. Lila handled them all, negotiating prices, arranging deliveries, managing logistics that her father couldn't begin to understand. Cal watched her transform in those moments, her exhaustion falling away as she calculated margins and bargained with a skill that would have impressed the merchants Ronan dealt with back home. She was brilliant, and no one saw it except him. One afternoon, a buyer named Hartwell arrived, a thin man with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. He walked through the orchard with Lila, inspecting the fruit, making notes in a small leather book. Quality's acceptable, he said, in the tone of someone doing her a favor. I'll take 30 crates at standard rate. Standard rate was acceptable last year, Lila said. This year's yield is higher quality. The drought broke early, and we got good rain in August. The apples are larger, sweeter, and they'll keep longer in storage. That's worth a premium. Hartwell raised an eyebrow. Is it now? Yes. He studied her for a moment, then glanced at Cal, who was loading crates onto a wagon nearby. Who's this? Hartwell asked. Hired help, Lila said. Hartwell walked closer, examining Cal with the same assessing look he'd given the apples. You let drifters work your orchard now. That's a risk. He's competent, Lila said flatly. And that's not your concern. Everything about the operation is my concern when I'm considering a purchase. Hartwell turned back to her. Standard rate, or I walk. Lila's jaw tightened. Cal knew that look now, the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing pride against necessity. She needed this sale. They both knew it. Standard rate, she said finally. But I want payment up front this time. No delayed terms. Hartwell smiled. Of course. I'll have the money by week's end. He left, and Lila stood in the middle of the orchard, her shoulders rigid. Cal approached carefully. You had him. No, I didn't. He would have paid more. And then he would have found another supplier next season. She turned to look at Cal, and there was something bleak in her expression. This is how it works. I push too hard, and we lose the buyer entirely. I don't push hard enough, and we barely survive. There's no winning, Cal. There's only making it through another year. That's reality. She picked up an empty crate and headed toward the next row of trees. Now let's get back to work. Cal watched her walk away, something heavy settling in his chest. Ronan had run an empire, but he'd never understood the calculations Lila made every day. The brutal mathematics of survival, when you had no cushion, no backup, no margin for error. Every decision was a gamble, every harvest a prayer, and she did it alone. That night, after supper, Cal found Lila in the barn, repairing a ladder with shaking hands. She'd been working since before dawn, and it was now well past sunset. You should rest, he said. This needs fixing. It can wait until morning. If it breaks tomorrow and I don't have a ladder, I lose a day's work. She hammered a nail with more force than necessary. I can't afford to lose a day. Cal took the hammer from her hands, gently but firmly. Then I'll fix it. You rest. She stared at him, too tired to argue. Then, to his surprise, she sank down onto a hay bale, her head dropping into her hands. I'm so tired, she whispered. It was the first time he'd heard her admit weakness, and it broke something in him. Cal set down the hammer and sat beside her, not touching, just present. Why do you stay? He asked quietly. Where would I go? Anywhere. You're smart enough, skilled enough. You could work for someone who'd pay you properly, treat you with respect. Lila lifted her head, looking at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. You think it's that simple? That I can just leave? She laughed, bitter and small. This orchard is all I have. It's all I've ever had. My mother is buried under that oak tree at the edge of the property. This is her legacy, not his. And if I leave, he'll destroy it within a year, drink it away, sell it off piece by piece. Everything she built will be gone. So you sacrifice yourself to preserve it? I sacrifice myself to preserve her. Lila's voice was steady now, certain. That's what love is, Cal. It's not some grand romantic gesture. It's showing up every day, doing the work, carrying the weight, even when no one sees it, even when no one cares, especially then. Cal sat with those words, feeling them settle into spaces he didn't know were empty. Ronan had never loved anyone that way, had never been loved that way. Every relationship he'd had was transactional, built on what he could provide, what doors his name could open. Even his parents had treated him more as a legacy than a son. But Lila knew how to love something beyond herself. And watching her sitting in the dim light of the barn, exhausted and unbreakable, Ronan realized he was in love with her. Not with the idea of her, not with some romantic notion, but with the actual woman, flawed, stubborn, carrying burdens she shouldn't have to carry, still finding the strength to keep going. Your mother would be proud, Cal said softly. Lila looked at him, surprised. Then something in her expression softened, just slightly. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence as the lamp burned low, two people who'd found something unexpected in the hard soil of survival. And Cal knew, with terrible certainty, that he was going to have to tell her the truth eventually. But not yet. Not when the lie was the only thing keeping this moment real. The weeks turned into a month, then two, and Cal learned what it meant to earn everything from scratch. He learned that hunger wasn't just an empty stomach. It was the way your thoughts slowed down, how lifting a crate became a negotiation between will and muscle. He learned that cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was waking up in the barn with frost on the blanket, your breath visible in the dark, your joints stiff and reluctant. He learned that satisfaction didn't come from signing a contract or watching numbers grow in a ledger. It came from looking at a row of trees you'd picked clean, knowing you'd done it right, knowing it mattered. But most of all, he learned Lila. Not the version she showed the world, the quiet, competent woman who carried her father's failures without complaint. He learned the person underneath, the way she hummed off key when she thought no one was listening, how she saved the best apples for the birds, leaving them on fence posts like offerings. The small smile that appeared when the morning light hit the trees just right, as if the orchard itself was saying thank you. She was lonely. That became clear as the days passed and she started talking more, filling the silence with observations about the weather, memories of her mother, complaints about a buyer who'd tried to cheat her. Cal listened, offering little of himself in return, knowing that every detail he invented was another lie to untangle later. But the space between them was shrinking anyway. It happened in small moments, her hand brushing his when they both reached for the same tool, the way she'd started checking his hands each evening, applying salve without being asked, her touch clinical but not unkind, how she'd divided her supper portions more evenly, insisting he needed the strength for the work. "You're getting better at this," she said one afternoon, watching him prune a difficult branch. They were in the north section, where the oldest trees grew, their limbs twisted and stubborn. "Had a good teacher, Ethan," Cal said. "I'm not a good teacher. I just tell you when you're doing it wrong. That's the best kind of teaching." Lila shook her head, but there was amusement in her eyes. She climbed down from her ladder and wiped her hands on her pants. "We're making good time. If the weather holds, we'll finish this section by week's end." "And then?" "Then we start preparing for winter. Repairs, preservation, praying the roof holds through the storms." She looked at the house, its patched shingles visible through the trees. "It's always something." Cal followed her gaze. He'd been thinking about the house lately, about the ways he could help. New shingles wouldn't cost much, and he had money hidden in his pack. Not Ronan's wealth, but enough to make a difference. But spending it would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Your father doesn't help with any of that?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Lila's expression closed off, the way it always did when the conversation turned to her father. "He has his role. I have mine. His role is sitting at the market taking credit for your work. Cal, I'm not trying to start a fight. I just don't understand how you can defend him." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the trees. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired. "I'm not defending him. I'm surviving him. There's a difference. You could—" "What? Leave?" "We've had this conversation." She turned to face him fully, and there was something fierce in her eyes. "This orchard is mine. Not legally, not on paper, but in every way that matters. I know every tree, every inch of soil. I know which sections flood in heavy rain and which stay dry. I know the rhythm of the seasons here, when to plant, when to prune, when to let things rest. My mother taught me all of it before she died, and I'm not abandoning that knowledge to him." "No, Machan." "Then let me help you take it from him." The words were out before Cal could stop them, and they hung in the air between them like a challenge. Lila stared at him. "What are you talking about? You do all the work. You make all the decisions that matter. He just takes the money and drinks it away. Why not cut him out entirely?" "Because he owns it. The deed is in his name." "Deeds can be changed. Not without money for lawyers, which we don't have." She picked up her basket of pruned branches. "You're talking about fantasy, Cal. This is reality. He owns the land and I work it. That's the arrangement. It's a bad arrangement. It's a bad It's the only one I have." She walked away, ending the conversation with the same quiet finality she used to end all difficult discussions. Cal watched her go, frustration burning in his chest. Ronan could have fixed this with a single conversation, could have bought the orchard outright, transferred the deed to Lila, removed her father from the equation entirely. Money, at that level, was a tool, simple and effective. But Cal had no such tool. Cal had only his hands, his labor, and a growing rage at the injustice of it all. That night, her father came home drunk again. Cal was half asleep in the loft when he heard the shouting. He climbed down quickly, crossing the yard to find Lila standing in the doorway, blocking her father's path. "You're not coming in like this," she said firmly. "It's my house," her father slurred, swaying. "You don't tell me—" "I'm telling you that if you want supper, you'll sleep it off first." There's no supper left, is there? You gave it all to that drifter boy. I gave him his portion, the same as you get. Her father's face darkened. You're getting ideas above yourself, girl, thinking because you do the work, you run things. I do run things, Lila said quietly. I have been for years. You just haven't noticed. The slap came fast, her father's palm connecting with her cheek with a sound that cracked through the night air. Cal moved without thinking. He was across the yard in seconds, putting himself between Lila and her father, his hand gripping the old man's wrist. Don't, Cal said, and it was Ronan's voice now, cold and absolute. Don't ever do that again. Her father tried to pull free, but Cal's grip was iron. The weeks of physical labor had built strength in his arms, in his shoulders. He could feel it now, the power to do real damage if he chose. Let go of me, her father hissed. Apologize to her. Like hell. Cal tightened his grip, just slightly, and saw the old man's face go pale. Apologize. Cal, let him go, Lila said behind him. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tremor underneath. Not until he apologizes. Cal, please. Something in her tone made him look back. She was touching her cheek where the slap had landed, and her eyes were on him, not her father, him. There was fear there, but not of her father. She was afraid of what Cal might do. He released the old man's wrist and stepped back. Her father stumbled, caught himself, then turned and disappeared into the house without a word. Lila stood in the doorway, still touching her cheek, watching Cal with an expression he couldn't read. I'm sorry, Cal said. I shouldn't have. You were going to hurt him. No, He stopped, because it would have been a lie. In that moment, he'd wanted to hurt the old man, badly. Maybe. Lila was quiet for a long time. Then she stepped down from the doorway and walked past him toward the well. She drew up a bucket of water, dampened a cloth, and pressed it to her face. Cal followed, keeping his distance. Lila, where did you learn to do that? She asked, not looking at him. Do what? Move like that. Grab him so fast. Use that voice. She lowered the cloth, meeting his eyes. You moved like someone who's used to being obeyed. And he believed you. Saw it in his face. He was scared. Cal's stomach dropped. He'd been so careful, weeks of maintaining the facade, and he'd blown it in seconds. I've been in fights before, he said, which was technically true, though not the kind she was imagining. That wasn't a fight. That was authority. She studied him in the moonlight, her gray eyes sharp. Who are you, Cal? Nobody. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you. Lila pressed the cloth to her cheek again, wincing slightly. You're not a drifter. Drifters don't talk like you do, don't carry themselves like you do. Even when you're trying to hide it, I can see it. The way you look at things, like you're used to better. The way you work, you're learning fast, but you learned late. These aren't skills you grew up with. Cal said nothing, because anything he said would be another lie. I don't care what you're running from, Lila continued, or who you were before. You've worked hard here, and you've been honest in the ways that matter. But don't lie to me about this. Don't pretend you're something you're not just to... She stopped, her voice catching. Just to what? She turned away. Just go, Cal. It's late. Lila, please. He wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to drop the whole pretense and explain that he was Ronan Hale, that he could buy this orchard 10 times over, that he could solve every problem she had with a single signature. But the words stuck in his throat because he knew what would happen if he spoke them. She'd hate him for the deception. And worse, she'd wonder if anything between them had been real. So he walked back to the barn and climbed into the loft. And he didn't sleep. The next morning, Lila was gone before dawn. Cal found a note in the kitchen, her handwriting neat despite being rushed. Taking the wagon to town, market day, back by evening. Her father was still asleep, snoring in the back room. Cal stood in the kitchen, looking at the note, feeling the distance Lila had just put between them. He spent the day working alone, pruning the trees she'd marked, repairing a section of fence that had been sagging. The physical labor was welcome. It gave him something to do with the restless energy burning through him. But as the sun climbed higher, a different thought began to take shape. Ronan had resources. Ronan had connections. Ronan could make things happen that Cal never could. What if he didn't have to choose between the two identities? What if he could use his real power to help her without revealing himself? The idea took root, growing throughout the afternoon. By the time Lila returned with the wagon, looking exhausted, her face still slightly bruised, Cal had made a decision. "How was the market?" he asked, helping her unload empty crates. "Fine," she said shortly. "Did you see Hartwell?" "Yes." "And?" "And he wants to renegotiate the contract for next season. Lower rates because of market conditions." She said the last two words with bitter sarcasm. "I told him I'd think about it." Cal lifted another crate. "What if you had other buyers?" "There are no other buyers. Hartwell controls most of the distribution in this region. You sell through him or you don't sell at all." "That can't be legal." Lila laughed, short and sharp. "Legal? You think the law cares about small orchards? Hartwell has money, connections. We have apples and hope. That's not a fair fight." "No," Cal said slowly. "It's not." That night, after Lila and her father had gone to bed, Cal retrieved the pack he'd hidden in the barn. Inside was the money he'd brought, modest by Ronan's standards, but significant by Cal's. There was also something else, a single piece of paper with an address in the territorial capital. Garrett, his foreman, would be there. Garrett, who was managing Ronan's estate and business interests. Garrett, who could be trusted with certain instructions if they were delivered correctly. Cal sat in the lamplight, composing a letter in his head. It would have to be carefully worded, nothing that would reveal where he was or what he was doing, but enough to set certain things in motion. He needed information about Hartwell's operation. He needed to know who else was being squeezed, what other orchards were struggling under similar contracts, and most importantly, he needed to know if there was a legal way to break Hartwell's hold on the region. It would take time, weeks, maybe months. But Ronan had always been patient when it mattered. The question was whether Cal could maintain the disguise that long. Over the next few days, Lila remained distant. Not cold exactly, but careful. She spoke to him only about work, kept their interactions brief. At meals, she sat in silence, eating quickly and leaving before conversation could start. Her father noticed. "What'd you do to her?" he asked Cal one evening, his tone almost amused. "Nothing." "Must have been something. Girl's been walking around like a ghost." Cal didn't respond. He had no interest in discussing Lila with her father, but the old man wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, studying Cal with bloodshot eyes. "You sweet on her? That's not your business. Everything about my daughter is my business." He took a drink from a flask he'd been nursing. "You should know, there's been talk. A man from the Brennan family, couple valleys over. Good land, good prospects. He's interested in Lila." Cal's hand stilled on the plate he was washing. Interested? In marrying her? Joining the families? Combining the orchards? The father said it casually, but there was calculation in his eyes. Would solve a lot of problems. Does Lila know about this? I've mentioned it. She's not enthusiastic, but she'll come around. Girl needs to be practical. Cal turned slowly, facing the old man. "You're going to sell her off. I'm going to arrange a beneficial marriage. That's what fathers do." "That's what you call it when you trade your daughter like livestock?" The father's face darkened. "Watch your mouth, boy. You work here, that's all. You don't get a say in family matters. If Lila doesn't want to marry him, Lila doesn't know what she wants. She's been alone too long, gotten too independent. A husband will straighten her out, give her purpose." Cal felt rage building in his chest, white-hot and dangerous. This man, this worthless, drunk, abusive man, was planning to hand Lila over to some stranger because it was convenient for him. "You're making a mistake," Cal said quietly. "No, you're making a mistake thinking you matter here." The father stood, swaying slightly. "The Brennan boy is coming by next week. You'll make yourself scarce when he does. Understood?" Cal didn't answer. "Understood," the father repeated louder. "I heard you." "Good." The old man stumbled toward the back room. "Remember your place, Drifter. You're here because I allow it." After he was gone, Cal stood in the kitchen, his hands gripping the edge of the table hard enough to hurt. Ronan could stop this. One conversation, one show of power, and the father would never dare try to marry Lila off to anyone. But Cal couldn't. Cal had nothing but his labor and his presence, and that might not be enough. He found Lila in the orchard the next morning, inspecting the trees in the southern section. She didn't acknowledge him when he approached, just continued her work. "Your father told me about the Brennan family," Cal said. Her hand stilled on the branch she was examining. "Of course he did. Are you actually considering it? What choice do I have? You could say no." Lila climbed down from the ladder, turning to face him. "And then what? He'll arrange it anyway, or he'll make my life here impossible until I agree. You don't understand how this works, Cal." "Then explain it to me." She set down her pruning shears, and for the first time in days, she really looked at him. "I'm 26 years old, unmarried, working land I don't own. Every year that passes, my options shrink. If I don't marry, I have no future beyond this orchard and this man who sees me as free labor. If I do marry, at least I might have some control over my own life. The Brennan boy would give you that?" "Maybe. I don't know. I've met him twice. He seemed fine. Not cruel. Not kind either, but not cruel. That's a low bar." "It's a realistic bar." She picked up a basket of apples and started walking toward the collection area. "You grew up somewhere better, I can tell. Somewhere where women have choices, where love actually matters. That's not this place. Here, you survive however you can." Cal followed her. "What if you had another option?" "I don't." "What if you did?" She stopped walking, setting down the basket. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Pushing me. Challenging my father. Acting like you can fix things." Her eyes searched his face. "What do you want from me, Cal?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. What did he want? When this started, it had been an experiment, a test of whether anyone could love him without his name. But it had become something else entirely. He wanted her to be free. He wanted her to have choices. He wanted her to look at him the way she'd looked at him that night in the barn, when she'd thanked him for saying her mother would be proud. He wanted her to choose him, not because she had no other options, but because she wanted to. "I want you to be happy," Cal said simply. Lila's expression softened, and for a moment, the wall came down. "That's kind of you, but kindness doesn't pay debts or buy land or change the way the world works. Maybe it should. Maybe. But it doesn't." She picked up the basket again. "The Brennan boy is visiting on Saturday. My father wants me to be, presentable, agreeable. So I will be, because that's what survival looks like." She walked away, and Cal stood in the orchard, watching her go. Saturday arrived too quickly. Cal spent the morning doing repairs on the far side of the property, keeping his distance as instructed, but he couldn't focus. Every sound made him look up, expecting to see the Brennan family arriving. They came just after noon, a wagon with 3 people. A man in his 50s, well-dressed for the frontier. A younger man, early 20s, with a solid build and a pleasant enough face. And a woman who must have been the mother, wearing a blue dress that looked expensive. Lila met them in the yard wearing a dress Cal had never seen before. Simple but clean, with her hair pinned up instead of braided. She looked different. Older, somehow. More formal. Her father was all charm, shaking hands, ushering the family inside. The younger man, the prospective husband, stayed close to Lila, trying to engage her in conversation. She responded politely, her face a careful mask. Cal watched from a distance, hidden behind the barn, his stomach churning. The visit lasted 2 hours. When the Brennan family finally left, Lila stood in the yard, watching their wagon disappear down the road. Her father said something to her. Cal couldn't hear the words, and she nodded. Then her father went inside, and Lila stood alone. Cal emerged from behind the barn, crossing the yard slowly. She didn't turn, even though she must have heard him. "How was it?" he asked. "Fine." "That's all?" Lila finally looked at him, and there was something exhausted in her eyes. "What do you want me to say, Cal? That I hated it? That I want to run away? None of that matters. He seemed decent. His family has good land. The marriage would secure our future. Your future or your father's? Is there a difference? Yes, Cal said firmly. You are not your father's property. You are not a piece of land to be traded. You're a person, Lila. You deserve to choose your own life. Easy to say when you have nothing at stake. The words hit harder than she probably intended. Because she was right. Cal had nothing at stake. Ronan had everything, but Cal was just a drifter who'd showed up 2 months ago. You're right, Cal said quietly. I have nothing. No land, no money, no prospects. But I know what it looks like when someone is extraordinary, and you are. You're smarter than every buyer who tries to cheat you. You're stronger than any person should have to be. You've kept this orchard alive through sheer force of will, and you deserve someone who sees that. Lila stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Cal, does he see it? The Brennan boy. Does he know what you're capable of? He doesn't need to know. He just needs to not make things worse. That's not enough. It's what I have. The words came out sharp, almost desperate. Lila turned away, her shoulders tight. You don't understand. You can't understand. You show up here with nothing, and somehow you still have freedom. You can leave whenever you want, go wherever you want. I'm trapped by this land, by my father, by the fact that I'm a woman with no money and no options. So yes, I'll marry the Brennan boy if it means I can eat regularly, and maybe have a say in my own home. That's the best I can hope for. Cal wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she had other options, that he could give her everything she needed. But he couldn't, not as Cal. And that was the trap he'd built for himself. I'm sorry, he said finally. Lila looked back at him, surprise flickering across her face. For what? For not being able to help you the way you need. Something in her expression cracked. She took a step toward him, close enough that he could see the bruise on her cheek had faded to yellow. You have helped me, Cal, more than you know. Having you here these months, it's been the first time I haven't felt completely alone. Then don't do this. Don't marry him. What's the alternative? Cal opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because the alternative was revealing who he really was, and he wasn't ready. Wasn't sure if he'd ever be ready, because the moment he told her, everything would change. She'd see him differently. Would question every moment they'd shared, wondering what was real and what was performance. I don't know, he admitted. Lila nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. Then we both have to live with what is, not what we wish could be. She walked toward the house, leaving Cal standing in the yard. That night, Cal wrote the letter to Garrett. He kept it vague, asking for information about Hartwell's business, about contracts in the region, about any legal vulnerabilities that might exist. He signed it with a code name Garrett would recognize, included instructions for a dead drop where the response could be left. It wasn't much, but it was something. The problem was, it would take weeks to get a response, and Lila didn't have weeks. The next morning, her father made the announcement at breakfast. The Brennans have made an offer, he said, speaking around a mouthful of bread. Good terms. Wedding would be in 6 weeks after their harvest is complete. Gives us time to prepare. Lila's fork stilled on her plate. 6 weeks. That's what I said, plenty of time. He looked at Cal. You'll be gone by then, of course. No need for extra help once the season's done. Cal met the old man's eyes and saw the calculation there. This wasn't just about marrying off Lila. This was about removing Cal from the equation entirely. Understood, Cal said. After breakfast, he found Lila in the orchard. She was pruning aggressively, taking out more branches than necessary. 6 weeks, Cal said. I heard. Is that what you want? It doesn't matter what I want. She didn't look at him, just kept cutting. It's what's happening. Lila took... Don't, Cal. Please, just don't. He wanted to push, wanted to make her see that she had power here, that she could refuse. But he also knew that pushing would only hurt her more. So instead, he picked up his own pruning shears and worked beside her in silence. And he started planning. Because Ronan Hale might not be able to stop this marriage directly, but he could damn well make sure Lila knew she had choices before she made a decision she couldn't undo. The letter from Garrett arrived 3 weeks later. Hidden in a package of supplies Cal had arranged to be delivered to a general store 2 towns over. He rode out before dawn to collect it, telling Lila he needed to pick up tools they couldn't get locally. The letter was brief but thorough. Garrett had done his research. Hartwell's operation was built on leverage. He'd bought out smaller distributors over the years, creating a monopoly that allowed him to dictate terms. But the system had cracks. Several orchards were organizing quietly, talking about pooling resources and shipping directly to markets in the capital. If enough producers banded together, they could bypass Hartwell entirely. There was more. Hartwell had debts, significant ones. A land speculation deal that had gone bad, loans coming due within the year. He needed cash flow, which meant he needed the orchards to keep selling through him at suppressed prices. The information was useful, but it wasn't enough. Cal needed time to coordinate with the other growers to build an alternative distribution network. Time Lila didn't have. He rode back to the orchard with the letter hidden in his coat, his mind working through possibilities. The wedding was now 3 weeks away. Lila had thrown herself into preparations with the same grim efficiency she applied to everything else, mending her mother's old wedding dress, organizing the small ceremony her father insisted on, responding to questions from the Brennan family with polite, distant answers. She'd stopped talking to Cal about anything beyond work. He understood why. Every conversation was a reminder of what she was giving up, of the choice she wasn't really making. It was easier to maintain distance, to treat him like any other seasonal worker whose time was almost done. But the distance was killing him. He'd fallen in love with her, not the romantic notion of it, but the messy, complicated reality. He loved the way she checked the trees each morning, like a mother checking on children. The way she'd saved a lame horse from slaughter by buying it with money she couldn't spare, keeping it in the far pasture where her father wouldn't notice. The way she'd taught him to read the weather, to feel the shift in the air that meant rain was coming. He loved her stubbornness, her pride, her refusal to admit defeat even when defeat was the only logical outcome, and he was going to lose her in 3 weeks unless he did something. That evening, Cal found her in the barn, oiling harnesses by lamplight. The wedding dress hung on a hook nearby, the white fabric ghostly in the dim light. "That needs mending on the sleeve, was he said, nodding toward the dress. Lila didn't look up. "I know, I'll get to it." Cal picked up a rag and started helping with the harnesses, working in silence for several minutes before speaking again. "I heard something in town today." "About what?" "About Hartwell. Apparently he's overextended himself financially. Several growers are talking about forming a cooperative, cutting him out." Lila's hand stilled. "Who told you that?" "A man at the general store. Said his brother runs an orchard 2 valleys over, been dealing with the same problems you have." It was a careful blend of truth and misdirection, and Cal hated himself for it, even as the words left his mouth. Lila set down the harness she was working on. A cooperative. They'd pool shipments, negotiate directly with buyers in the capital, split the costs and the profits. That takes organization, money to get started. Some, but if enough orchards joined, the initial costs spread thin. Lila was quiet, thinking. Cal could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, calculating possibilities. Then her expression closed off. "It doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because I'm getting married in 3 weeks, and the Brennan family isn't going to want their new daughter-in-law running cooperative negotiations. They want someone who will manage their kitchen and bear their children." "You don't know that." "I know enough." She stood, gathering the harnesses. "And even if I did know, what difference would it make? My father already agreed to the terms. The announcement's been made. Breaking it off now would humiliate both families. So you'll go through with it to save face?" "I'll go through with it because it's done, Cal. The decision is made." She hung the harnesses on their hooks with more force than necessary. "I need you to stop doing this." "Doing what?" "Giving me hope." She turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes, though her voice stayed steady. "Every time you talk about alternatives, about things that could be different, it makes this harder. I've accepted what's happening. I need you to accept it too." "I can't." "You have to." "Why?" "But because you're leaving." The words burst out of her, raw and angry. "In 3 weeks, you'll be gone. back to wherever you came from, whatever life you had before. And I'll still be here, still trapped, still trying to survive. So your acceptance doesn't matter, mine does. Cal took a step toward her. What if I stayed? Lila went very still. What? What if I didn't leave? What if I stayed and helped you build something here? We could join that cooperative together, make this orchard profitable enough that you don't need your father or the Brennans or anyone else. Cal, you can't. Why not? I know this work now. I'm getting better at it, and we work well together. You've said so yourself. That's not the point. Then what is? Lila pressed her hands to her face, and when she lowered them, the tears had spilled over. The point is that you're a stranger. You showed up 2 months ago with nothing, and you could disappear tomorrow just as easily. I can't build a future on that. The Brennan boy, I don't love him, and I probably never will, but he's solid. He's predictable. His family has land and resources. That's what I need. You need safety. Yes. And you think I can't give you that. I think you won't. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because eventually, whatever you're running from will catch up with you, or you'll get bored of playing farmer, or you'll realize that this life is harder than you thought. And then you'll leave, and I'll have given up everything for nothing. The accusation hung between them, and Cal couldn't argue with it, because she was right. He was playing farmer. This entire thing had been a game at the start, an experiment to see if anyone could love him without his wealth. But it had stopped being a game weeks ago, and he needed her to know that. I'm not playing, Cal said quietly. This is the most real thing I've ever done. Lila searched his face, and for a moment he thought she might believe him. Then she shook her head. It doesn't matter. The wedding is in 3 weeks. That's the end of it. She walked past him toward the house, and Cal stood alone in the barn, staring at the wedding dress that hung like a ghost of futures that would never be. He'd run out of time for careful plans and long-term strategies. If he was going to stop this, he had to act now, and that meant revealing the truth. The next morning, Cal rode into town with a single purpose. He sent a telegram to Garrett using his real name, with instructions that would set everything in motion. Then he went to the land office and requested copies of the deed to the Mercer orchard. The clerk looked at him suspiciously. This is public record, but I need to know why you're requesting it. I'm considering a business arrangement with the owner, Cal said. It was technically true. The clerk shrugged and pulled out the relevant documents. Cal paid the fee and took the copies, studying them carefully. The deed was in her father's name, as expected. But there were debts attached, liens from various creditors, some going back years. The orchard wasn't just poorly managed, it was underwater financially, held together by Lila's labor and nothing else. Her father had been borrowing against the land to fund his drinking, and eventually those debts would come due. When they did, the orchard would be sold to pay them off, and Lila would have nothing. The Brennan marriage wasn't about joining families. It was about her father unloading a financial liability before it collapsed entirely. Cal felt rage building in his chest, white and pure. That man was selling his daughter to escape debts she didn't even know about, sentencing her to a marriage she didn't want to save himself from consequences he'd earned. Ronan could fix this, could pay off the debts, clear the title, put the land in Lila's name where it belonged. It would take one afternoon and a bank draft. But doing that meant revealing everything, meant admitting he'd been lying to her for months, meant watching whatever trust she had in him shatter. Cal rode back to the orchard with the documents folded in his coat and a decision crystallizing in his mind. He would tell her the truth. All of it. Who he was, why he'd come, what he'd discovered. And then he'd let her choose, with full knowledge of all her options. If she hated him for the deception, he'd accept it, but at least she'd know she had a choice. He found her in the orchard's eastern section, picking the last of the late-season apples. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches, painting everything gold. "Lila!" he called out. She looked down from the ladder, surprise crossing her face. He usually didn't seek her out anymore, respecting the distance she'd requested. "What is it?" she asked. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Something in his tone made her climb down immediately. She set her basket aside and walked over, concern in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Cal took a breath, preparing to speak the words that would either save everything or destroy it. Then hoofbeats sounded from the road, and they both turned. A rider was approaching, a young man on a good horse, dressed well. As he got closer, Cal recognized him from the visit weeks ago. The Brennan boy had come back. He dismounted in the yard, nodding politely to Lila. "Miss Mercer, sorry to arrive unannounced. I was hoping we could talk?" Lila glanced at Cal, then back to the visitor. "Of course, let me just—" "Actually, the Brennan boy said, his eyes flicking to Cal. "I was hoping we could speak privately about the wedding arrangements." Cal felt something twist in his gut. This was it. The moment everything would be finalized, made official. If he didn't speak now, he might not get another chance. "Lila," Cal said urgently. She looked at him, confusion and something else in her expression. "Cal, I need to— Please, just give me 5 minutes first." The Brennan boy frowned. "Sir, I don't mean to be rude, but this is family business." "He's not family," Lila said quietly, and the words cut deeper than Cal expected. "Cal, I'll find you after. Whatever you need to say can wait." "It can't." "Cal!" "Your father is selling the orchard," Cal said, the words tumbling out. "The deed has liens against it, debts he's been hiding. When they come due, the land gets seized to pay them off. This marriage isn't about joining families, it's about him escaping bankruptcy." Silence fell over the yard. Lila stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Cal pulled out the documents he'd gotten from the land office and held them out. "I went to town this morning. These are copies of the deed. Look at the attachments." Lila took the papers with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the pages. The Brennan boy stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. "These debts," Lila said slowly. "Some of these are from before my mother died. He's been borrowing for years. And when the creditors call them in, probably soon from the dates, the orchard gets sold," Cal said. "You lose everything." Lila looked up at him, and there was something broken in her expression. "How did you know to look for this?" And there it was, the question he couldn't answer without revealing everything. The Brennan boy spoke before Cal could. "I knew about the debts." Both Lila and Cal turned to him. "What?" Lila said. The young man had the decency to look uncomfortable. "My father investigated before making the marriage offer. That's standard practice for these arrangements. We knew the orchard was encumbered." "And you didn't think to tell me?" "It wasn't. I mean, once we were married, the debts would be consolidated with our family holdings. The creditors would accept payment terms from us that they wouldn't from your father. The land would stay in production, just under different management." "Your management," Lila said flatly. "Well, yes. But you'd still be connected to it. And you'd have security, comfort, a real home." Lila looked down at the papers in her hands, then at the orchard surrounding them. The trees she'd tended for years, the soil she knew intimately, the legacy her mother had left her. "You were going to take it," she said quietly. "All of you. My father, your family. You were just going to take everything my mother built and parcel it out among yourselves." "That's not fair, the Brennan boy protested. "The marriage offer was genuine. I genuinely like you, Lila, and my family would treat you well, in exchange for my labor and my land. In exchange for partnership, for building something together, on land that used to be mine." Lila's voice was getting louder now, the emotion breaking through. "Land my mother bled for, that I've sacrificed everything to maintain, and you all just decided among yourselves that it would be simpler to marry me off than to let me keep what's mine." The Brennan boy opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly unsure how to respond. Lila turned to Cal, and there was something fierce and demanding in her eyes. "How did you know to look? Why did you go to the land office?" This was it, the moment of truth. "Because I wanted to help you," Cal said, "and I have resources you don't know about." "What kind of resources?" Cal pulled off his hat, running his hand through his hair. His heart was pounding. "My real name isn't Cal. It's Ronan. Ronan Hale." Lila's face went blank. "The Hale family?" "Yes. The Hale family that owns half the territory? That Hale family?" "Yes." The Brennan boy took a step back, his eyes widening. Even in his relatively sheltered world, everyone knew the Hale name. Lila stared at Cal, at Ronan, for a long moment. Then she laughed, short and bitter. Of course. Of course you're Ronan Hale. Lila, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That everything between us has been what? Some kind of game? Research for how the poor people live? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She was shouting now, and Cal had never heard her raise her voice before. You showed up here pretending to be nobody. Let me feed you and teach you and… Her voice broke. And I trusted you. I know, and I'm sorry. I came here with the wrong intentions, but that changed. Everything changed. When? When did it change, Ronan? She spat his real name like a curse. When you were studying me like some kind of experiment, when you were laughing at how pathetic my life was, I never laughed. I never thought you were pathetic. Cal took a step toward her, desperate. I thought you were extraordinary. I still do. That's why I'm here. Why I stayed. Why you lied. She backed away from him. For months you lied to me. Every conversation, every meal, every moment we worked together, all of it built on deception. The work was real. My respect for you was real. Everything I felt, I don't believe you. The tears were flowing freely now, but her voice stayed strong. You're Ronan Hale. You could have bought this orchard 100 times over. You could have solved every problem I have with a signature. But instead you played dress up as a farmhand and watched me struggle. What was I to you? Entertainment? No, never. Cal's own voice was breaking now. I came here to find out if anyone could love me without my name. That was selfish and stupid, and I'm sorry. But what I found was you, brilliant and strong and carrying burdens you shouldn't have to carry. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Not with some idea of you, but with who you actually are. Stop. Lila pressed her hands to her ears. Just stop talking. The Brennan boy cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should go. This seems like a private matter. No, Lila said sharply. You stay. We have things to discuss. Cal felt his stomach drop. Lila, please. You need to leave, Ronan. She wouldn't look at him. Get your things and go. I don't want you here. I can help you. I can pay off these debts, put the land in your name, set you up with resources. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's you trying to fix the mess you made by lying to me. She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was unbearable. You wanted to know if anyone could love you without your money? Well, congratulations. I did. I loved Cal, the man who worked beside me, who bandaged his blistered hands and kept going, who stood up to my father even though he had no right to. I loved that man. But he doesn't exist, does he? He was just a costume you wore. He was real. I'm real. The man standing here right now is the same person who worked beside you all those weeks. No, he's not. Because that man was honest about what he had. He had nothing, same as me, and we were equals. But you? She gestured at him, at his clothes, at everything he represented. You have everything. And you chose to pretend you didn't, which means I can never trust anything about you. How could I? How could I ever know what's real and what's just another layer of performance? Cal had no answer for that, because she was right. He'd built their entire relationship on a lie, and now that foundation was crumbling. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for all of it, but my offer stands. Let me pay off the debts. Let me put this land in your name where it belongs. You don't have to marry anyone, not him, not me. You can keep what's yours. Lila looked down at the document still clutched in her hand. For a moment, Cal thought she might actually consider it. Then she handed the papers back to him. I don't want anything from you. Not your money, not your help, not your guilty conscience trying to make things right. Just go. Lila, go. The word echoed across the orchard, sending birds scattering from the trees. Cal stood frozen for a moment, looking at the woman he loved, seeing nothing but pain and betrayal in her eyes. Then he turned and walked toward the barn to collect his things. Behind him, he heard the Brennan boy speak quietly. Miss Mercer, if you need time to process all this… I need to know the truth, Lila interrupted. You said your family investigated the debts. What were you planning to do with this land once we married? Their voices faded as Cal entered the barn and climbed to the loft. His pack was still where he'd hidden it, untouched. He pulled it out and began stuffing his few belongings inside. His hands were shaking. He'd known this was a possibility, that revealing the truth might end badly. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it were different things. The look in her eyes, the betrayal, the hurt, it was worse than anything he'd imagined. Cal descended the ladder and walked back outside. Lila and the Brennan boy were still talking in the yard, their heads close together. She glanced up as Cal passed, but her expression was closed off, unreadable. He untied his horse, not the old roan he'd bought months ago, but a decent gelding he'd acquired in town weeks back, and mounted up. For a moment he considered saying something else, making one more attempt to explain or apologize or beg for forgiveness, but he'd done enough damage. So he turned the horse toward the road and rode away from the orchard, away from Lila, away from the only honest thing he'd ever tried to do. He made it about a mile before he had to stop, his chest tight with something between grief and rage. He dismounted and stood at the side of the road, staring back toward the orchard he could no longer see. He'd lost her. Not because he wasn't wealthy enough or powerful enough, but because he'd been too much of a coward to be honest from the start. The irony was bitter. He'd come to test whether anyone could love him without his name, and he'd found someone who did. But he'd destroyed that love by hiding the very thing he'd wanted to prove didn't matter. Ronan stood there for a long time, trying to figure out what came next. And then, slowly, a new thought took shape. He'd lost her trust, but maybe he could still save her future. Even if she never forgave him, even if she went through with marrying the Brennan boy, Ronan could make sure she wasn't robbed of her mother's legacy. He could pay off the debts anonymously, clear the title, make it so the land stayed in her hands no matter what happened. It wouldn't fix what he'd broken between them, but it would give her the choice she deserved. Ronan mounted his horse again and turned toward town, toward the telegraph office, toward the lawyers and bankers who could make things happen. Cal was gone, but Ronan Hale still had work to do. Ronan spent 3 days in the territorial capital making arrangements. He met with lawyers, bankers, and the kind of men who specialized in making problems disappear for the right price. The debts on the Mercer orchard were substantial but not insurmountable, at least not for someone with Ronan's resources. He paid them all off. Every creditor, every lien, every outstanding loan her father had taken against the land. Then he had the lawyers draw up new papers transferring the deed into Lila's name exclusively, with ironclad provisions that prevented her father from ever borrowing against it again. The whole process cost him less than he spent on horses in a typical year. "How do you want this delivered?" his lawyer asked, shuffling the final documents into a leather portfolio. "Should I send a representative to notify Miss Mercer?" Ronan considered. The easy answer was yes. Have someone else handle it. Keep his distance. Let the paperwork speak for itself. But something in him resisted. If he was going to do this, he needed to face the consequences directly. "I'll deliver them myself," Ronan said. The lawyer raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He handed over the portfolio and wished Ronan luck in a tone that suggested he thought luck wouldn't be enough. Ronan rode back toward the orchard with the documents in his saddlebag and no clear plan beyond showing up. It had been a week since Lila had thrown him out. The wedding was now 2 weeks away, and for all he knew, she'd already made her final decision about the Brennan boy. But she deserved to know she had options, even if she hated him for it. He arrived at dusk, the sky painted in shades of purple and orange. The orchard looked the same as always, rows of gnarled trees, the house with its patched roof, the barn where he'd slept for months. But it felt different now, like a place he'd dreamed about rather than lived in. Ronan dismounted and tied his horse to the fence. Before he could cross the yard, the door to the house opened and Lila's father emerged, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "You've got nerve showing your face here," the old man said. Ronan kept his hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to Lila." "She doesn't want to talk to you, said so herself." "I have documents she needs to see, legal papers concerning the orchard." The father's eyes narrowed. "What kind of papers?" "The kind that affect ownership." "Is she here?" "She's out back, but you're not seeing her until I know what this is about." He shifted the shotgun slightly, not quite pointing it at Ronan, but not exactly pointing it away either. You pulled some kind of trick, getting information about my debts. That's my business, not yours. Your debts became her problem when you borrowed against land she maintains, Ronan said evenly. But that's not an issue anymore. What's that supposed to mean? Before Ronan could answer, Lila appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. She stopped short when she saw him, her expression cycling through surprise, anger, and something harder to read. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I told him to leave," her father said, was just about to encourage him more directly. "Put the gun down, Pa." Lila set the basket on the porch steps and walked closer, stopping about 10 feet from Ronan. She looked thinner than she had a week ago, her face drawn with exhaustion. "What do you want, Ronan?" Hearing his real name from her lips still stung, especially with the coldness in her voice. But he'd earned that coldness. "I have something for you," Ronan said, pulling the portfolio from his saddlebag. "Legal documents. They're important." "I don't want anything from you." "I know, but you need to see these anyway." He held out the portfolio. Lila didn't move to take it. "What are they?" "The debts on the orchard have been paid, all of them. The deed is now in your name, free and clear, with provisions that prevent anyone, including your father, from borrowing against it without your explicit consent." Silence fell over the yard. Even the evening birds seemed to pause. Lila's father was the first to speak. "You did what?" "I paid off your debts," Ronan said, still looking at Lila. "The orchard belongs to her now." "That's my land." The old man's face was turning red. "You had no right. You had no right to gamble with your daughter's future," Ronan cut in. "But it's done. The papers are filed with the Territorial Land Office, legally binding." The father took a step forward, raising the shotgun higher, but Lila moved between them. "Pa, go inside," she said quietly. "He can't just... inside. Now." Something in her tone made the old man hesitate. Then he lowered the gun and stalked toward the house, slamming the door behind him. Lila turned back to Ronan, and there was no gratitude in her expression, only wariness. "Why did you do this?" "Because it was the right thing to do." "That's not an answer." Ronan set the portfolio on the fence post between them. "You deserve to keep what's yours. Your mother's legacy shouldn't be sold off to pay for your father's mistakes. So I fixed it." "Just like that, you just fixed it." "Yes." Lila crossed her arms. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing." "I don't believe you. Men like you don't spend money without expecting something back." The accusation landed harder than she probably intended, because it was true, or at least it had been true. The old Ronan, the one who'd lived his entire life in transactions, would never have done something like this without calculating the return. "I want you to have choices," Ronan said. "That's all. If you want to marry the Brennan boy, you can do it without having to save your father's debts. If you want to stay here and run the orchard yourself, you can do that too. If you want to sell the whole thing and start over somewhere else, that's your decision to make. How generous of you giving me permission to live my own life. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Lila picked up the portfolio, flipping through the documents without really reading them. "You show up here, turn everything upside down, and then throw money at the problems you helped create. And somehow I'm supposed to be grateful?" "I don't expect gratitude. I expect you to hate me, honestly. But I couldn't leave without making sure you had what you deserved." Lila looked up from the papers. "You're leaving again?" "I already left. I just came back to deliver these." "Where will you go?" The question caught him off guard. "Back to my estate, I suppose. Back to managing land and signing papers and living the life I was trying to escape when I came here." "Must be nice, having a life to escape to." Ronan flinched. "Lila, do you have any idea what you've done?" She gestured at the documents, her voice rising. "You think you fixed everything, but you just made it more complicated." "My father is going to lose his mind when he realizes he doesn't control the orchard anymore. The Brennan family is going to have questions about why Ronan Hale suddenly paid off our debts. And everyone in this territory is going to know that I'm connected to you somehow, which means I'll spend the rest of my life answering questions and dealing with assumptions about what we are to each other. I didn't think..." "No, you didn't. You acted like someone with unlimited resources who's never had to consider consequences. You saw a problem and threw money at it, and now I have to live with the aftermath. Ronan felt something crack inside him. She was right. Again. He'd acted on impulse, thinking only about solving the immediate issue without considering how it would affect her day-to-day reality. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. I should have asked you first, should have considered—" "You should have been honest from the beginning," Lila interrupted. "That's what you should have done. Instead of playing games, instead of pretending to be someone you're not, you should have just told the truth." "If I'd told you who I was that first day, would you have let me stay?" Lila opened her mouth, then closed it. They both knew the answer was no. "That's what I thought," Ronan said quietly. "So I lied, and I'm sorry for that, sorrier than I can express. But I'm not sorry for getting to know you. I'm not sorry for the time we spent working together, and I'm not sorry for falling in love with you, even though I had no right to." Lila's eyes widened slightly. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't say things like that. Don't try to make this romantic when it's just—" She pressed her hands to her face. "When it's just broken. It doesn't have to be." "Yes, it does." She lowered her hands, and there were tears on her cheeks. "Because I can't trust you, Ronan. Every time I look at you, I'll wonder what else you're hiding. Every word you say, I'll question whether it's truth or performance. That's not love. That's just damage." The words hit like physical blows, and Ronan had no defense against them, because she was absolutely right. "So what happens now?" he asked. Lila wiped her eyes and looked down at the documents in her hands. "Now I figure out what to do with an orchard I legally own but don't know how to manage alone. I deal with my father's anger. I explain to the Brennan family why our circumstances have suddenly changed. And eventually, maybe, I figure out how to trust anyone again." "You won't marry him then?" "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not." She met his eyes. "But that's my decision to make, not yours to influence." "I understand." Lila tucked the portfolio under her arm. "You should go, for real this time. Don't come back. Don't send letters. Don't try to check on me. I need space to figure out my life without you in it." Ronan wanted to argue, to promise he could change, to beg for another chance, but he'd lost the right to ask for anything from her. "All right," he said, "but if you ever need anything—" "I won't." "But if you do, Garrett knows how to reach me. My foreman, he's based in the capital." Lila nodded stiffly, a goodbye that wasn't quite a goodbye. Ronan untied his horse and mounted up. He looked back one more time, memorizing the sight of her standing in the yard of the orchard she now owned, surrounded by trees she'd kept alive through sheer determination. Then he turned his horse and rode away. This time, he didn't stop a mile down the road. He kept riding until the orchard was far behind him, until the landscape changed and the familiar territory gave way to something less known. He'd tested his question whether anyone could love him without his name, and found an answer he hadn't expected. Yes, someone could love him, but only if he was honest about who he was. The disguise he'd worn had protected him from rejection, but it had also made real connection impossible. Ronan rode through the night and into the next day, his mind churning through everything that had happened. By the time he reached his estate, he'd made a decision. He would honor Lila's request for space. He wouldn't contact her, wouldn't interfere in her life, but he would stay close enough to help if she needed it, quietly, invisibly, the way he should have done from the start. And if she never forgave him, he'd accept that too. Because loving someone meant respecting their choices, even when those choices hurt. Garrett was waiting when Ronan arrived home, standing on the front steps of the main house with his arms crossed. "You look terrible, Garrett," Garrett said by way of greeting. "Thank you for your honesty." "You going to tell me what happened, or do I have to guess?" Ronan dismounted and handed the reins to a stable hand. "I found what I was looking for, and then I lost it by being an idiot." "Ah." Garrett fell into step beside him as they walked toward the house. "The Mercer girl? How did you—" "I'm not stupid, Ronan. You send me cryptic requests for information about orchards and distribution networks, then disappear for months? I put the pieces together." They entered the house, and Ronan headed straight for his study. It looked exactly as he'd left it. Papers neatly stacked, books on shelves, everything organized and lifeless. I paid off her father's debts, Ronan said, pouring himself a drink. Put the land in her name. Garrett whistled low. Bet that went over well. About as well as you'd expect. Ronan downed the whiskey in one gulp. She told me never to contact her again. Are you going to listen? I don't have a choice. Garrett was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Paying off the debts, I mean. The rest of it, lying about who you were, that was stupid, but making sure she kept her land. That was decent. Decent doesn't undo the harm. No, but it's something. Ronan poured another drink but didn't consume it, just stared at the amber liquid. I don't know how to go back to this life, Garrett. After months of working with my hands, earning every meal, sleeping in a barn, how do I just sit here and shuffle papers? You don't, Garrett said. You find a new way forward. Maybe you get more involved in the actual work instead of just managing from a distance. Maybe you use your position to help people like Lila instead of just existing in comfort. That sounds like something she would say. Then maybe she was a good influence. Ronan finally looked at his foreman, this man who'd been working for him for years, who probably knew him better than anyone. Do you think she'll ever forgive me? Garrett shrugged. I don't know her, but I know you've got a tendency to underestimate people. If she's as remarkable as you say, maybe she'll surprise you. Or maybe she'll marry the Brennan boy and forget I ever existed. Also possible. Garrett headed for the door, then paused. But either way, you can't undo what happened. You can only decide who you're going to be going forward. The man who hides behind his name, or the man who earns his place every day. He left, and Ronan sat alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that suddenly felt hollow. Garrett was right. He couldn't go back to who he'd been before, but he also couldn't move forward until he accepted that some things, some people, were lost to him permanently. The next 2 weeks were torture. Ronan threw himself into work, but it felt meaningless. He reviewed contracts and approved expenditures and met with businessmen, and through it all his mind was at the orchard, wondering if Lila had confronted her father, wondering if the Brennan family had withdrawn their marriage offer or pressed forward despite the changed circumstances, wondering if she was managing alone or if she'd found help. He kept his promise not to contact her, but that didn't stop him from thinking about her constantly. On what would have been her wedding day, Ronan sat in his study and drank himself into a stupor. He imagined her in that mended white dress, standing beside the Brennan boy, promising to love and honor a man she'd chosen out of necessity rather than desire. The thought was unbearable. He woke the next morning with a splitting headache and a resolve to do something, anything, to distract himself. He called Garrett into the study and outlined a new plan. I want to establish a fund, Ronan said, his voice rough from the previous night's excess. For small farmers and orchard owners in the territory, low-interest loans, resources for cooperative organization, legal assistance against predatory buyers. Garrett raised an eyebrow. That's a significant undertaking. I have significant resources. This about the Mercer girl? This is about making sure what happened to her doesn't happen to others. Ronan pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started making notes. I want you to coordinate with the lawyers, set up the structure, establish the criteria, and I want it done anonymously, no connection to the Hale name. Why anonymous? Oh, because I don't want credit. I just want it to work. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll get started. Thank you. As Garrett turned to leave, Ronan called out, And Garrett, keep your ear to the ground about the Mercer orchard. I don't need details, just make sure she's all right. Ronan, she asked you not to... I know what she asked, but I can't just pretend she doesn't exist. If something goes wrong, if she needs help, I want to know. Garrett sighed but nodded. I'll be discreet. Over the following days, Ronan poured his energy into the fund. It gave him purpose, a way to channel the restless guilt into something productive. He met with lawyers and bankers, set up the legal framework, allocated substantial capital to get it started. It wouldn't fix what he'd broken with Lila, but it might prevent others from facing the same impossible choices she'd been forced to make. 3 weeks after delivering the land documents, Garrett appeared in Ronan's study with news. She didn't marry him, Garrett said without preamble. Ronan looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing. What? The Brennan boy. The wedding was called off. Apparently she told him she needed time to figure things out on her own, and he didn't take it well. There was an argument. Ronan's heart was pounding. Is she all right? From what I hear, she gave as good as she got, told him she wasn't interested in a marriage where her land was the primary attraction. Garrett's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. The Brennan family withdrew their offer pretty quickly after that. And her father? That's where it gets interesting. Apparently she kicked him out. Ronan stood. She what? Once she had legal ownership, she gave him an ultimatum: sober up and contribute to the orchard's actual work, or leave. He chose to leave. Last I heard, he's living with his brother 2 valleys over. Ronan sat back down, processing this information. Lila had done it. She'd taken control of her own life, made the hard decisions, stood up for herself. Without his help. Without anyone's help. Exactly as she should have. There's more, Garrett continued. She's joined that cooperative I told you about. The one organizing against Hartwell. She's actually become one of their leaders. Apparently she's got a head for logistics and negotiation. Pride swelled in Ronan's chest, mixed with a bittersweet ache. This was who she'd always been underneath the circumstances that had constrained her. Now, finally, she had the freedom to show it. Thank you for letting me know, Ronan said quietly. Garrett hesitated. You want me to keep monitoring the situation? No, she's making her own way. That's what she wanted. Ronan picked up his pen, returning to his work. Let her be. Garrett left, and Ronan tried to focus on the documents in front of him. But his mind kept drifting to an orchard 2 days' ride away, to a woman who'd proven stronger than anyone had given her credit for. He wondered if she ever thought about him, wondered if she hated him still, or if time had softened the anger into something more forgiving. He'd probably never know. And somehow, he had to find a way to live with that. 2 months passed, and Ronan learned to live with the hollow feeling that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. He worked, he slept, he went through the motions of being Ronan Hale. The fund he'd established was gaining traction. Small farmers were accessing loans. The cooperative Lila had joined was successfully negotiating better terms with buyers in the capital. Hartwell's monopoly was crumbling, piece by piece. It should have felt satisfying. It mostly just felt empty. Garrett stopped providing updates without being asked, which Ronan appreciated. But occasionally news filtered through anyway. The orchard was doing well. Lila had hired 2 workers to help with the harvest. The cooperative had secured a major contract that would benefit all its members. She was thriving, and Ronan was genuinely happy for her, even as it reinforced how little she needed him. Then, on a cold morning in late October, Garrett walked into Ronan's study with an unusual expression on his face. There's someone here to see you, he said. Ronan looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing. I don't have any appointments scheduled. I know, but you'll want to take this one. Something in Garrett's tone made Ronan set down his pen. Who is it? She didn't give her name, just said you'd know her. Ronan's heart stopped, then started again with a painful lurch. He stood, suddenly aware that he was wearing old work clothes, that he hadn't shaved in 2 days, that he looked nothing like the polished businessman people expected Ronan Hale to be. Where is she? He asked. Front parlor. I offered her tea, but she declined. Ronan crossed the house with Garrett trailing behind. His hands were shaking slightly, and he pressed them flat against his thighs to steady them. This could be anything. Maybe she was here to return the land documents, to tell him she didn't want Charity after all. Maybe she was here to confirm that she never wanted to see him again. He pushed open the parlor door and stopped. Lila stood by the window, looking out at the grounds. She wore a simple traveling dress, dark green wool with her hair braided and pinned up. She looked different than he remembered, not thinner, but stronger somehow. There was a confidence in the way she held herself that hadn't been there before. She turned when she heard the door, and their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Hello, Ronan, Lila said finally. Hello. His voice came out rougher than he intended. I didn't expect... Garrett said someone was here, but I didn't think... You're rambling. I am. Sorry. He took a breath, trying to collect himself. What are you doing here? I came to talk to you. She moved away from the window, closer to where he stood. And to see if you'd take a walk with me. I've been riding for 2 days and I could use the exercise. Ronan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They walked out of the house together, maintaining a careful distance between them. Garrett watched from the doorway with an unreadable expression. The grounds of Ronan's estate were extensive. Manicured gardens, walking paths, a small lake in the distance. They followed one of the paths in silence, the only sound their footsteps on the gravel and the occasional call of a bird. Finally, Lila spoke. Your home is beautiful. Thank you. It's nothing like the orchard. No, it's not. More silence. Ronan wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but didn't know where to start. I heard you didn't marry the Brennan boy, he said carefully. News travels. Lila glanced at him. Did you also hear that I kicked my father out? I did. Are you going to lecture me about family duty? No, I think you made the right choice. She smiled, small and sad. He's actually doing better, believe it or not. Living with my uncle seems to have given him some perspective. He's drinking less. We talk occasionally. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. I'm glad. They walked a bit further, passing through a garden where late-season roses were still clinging to their blooms. The cooperative is working well, Lila continued. We've secured contracts with 3 major buyers in the capital, and we're negotiating with 2 more. Hartwell tried to undercut us, but we held firm. Turns out he needs us more than we need him. You did that. You organized it. I had help. A lot of people contributed. She paused. There's also been some kind of fund making low-interest loans available to small farmers. Anonymous donor. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Ronan felt heat rise in his face. I might have set something up. I thought so. Lila stopped walking and turned to face him fully. You can't help yourself, can you? Even when I told you to stay out of my life, you're still trying to fix things. The fund isn't about you specifically. It's for everyone who… Ronan. She said his name gently, without anger. I'm not upset. I'm just observing. He met her eyes, trying to read her expression. Why are you here, Lila? Because I've spent 2 months being angry at you, and I'm tired of it. She started walking again, and he fell into step beside her. I was justified in that anger. You lied to me. You manipulated the situation. You made choices that affected my life without consulting me. All of that was real, and I'm not pretending it wasn't. I know, and I'm sorry. I know you are. I could see it in your face when you delivered those land documents. You were sorry, and you were trying to make it right the only way you knew how. She picked a dying rose from a bush, turning it in her fingers. But the thing is, being angry at you meant I was still giving you power over my life, and I didn't want that anymore. So you're here to… What? Tell me you forgive me? I'm here to tell you that I've made my peace with what happened. She let the rose petals fall. You came into my life under false pretenses, yes, but the work you did was real. The conversations we had were real. And the way you saw me, not as my father's daughter, or as a burden, or as someone to be managed, but as a person with worth and capability, that was real too. Ronan felt his throat tighten. It was, all of it. I believe you. It took me a while, but I do. Lila stopped at a bench overlooking the lake and sat down. Ronan sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. The truth is, I learned something from you. Not from Ronan Hale, the wealthy landowner, but from Cal, from the man who showed up at my orchard with nothing and worked until his hands bled. What did you learn? That I was stronger than I thought, that I didn't need someone to save me. I just needed someone to believe I could save myself. She looked at him. You believed that. Even when you were lying about who you were, you saw what I was capable of. And once I owned the land, once I had the legal power to make my own choices, I proved you right. You proved yourself right, Ronan corrected. I just removed some obstacles. Fair enough. Lila was quiet for a moment, watching the sunlight play across the water. So here's what I've been thinking. You asked a question when you came to the orchard, whether anyone could love you without your name and your money. And I did. I loved Cal, the man who was honest about having nothing. I know, and I destroyed that by lying. You did, but you also learned something, didn't you, about what actually matters? Ronan nodded slowly. I learned that respect can't be bought, that working beside someone is different than managing them from a distance, that the most extraordinary people are often the ones nobody's paying attention to, and that love requires honesty, complete honesty, which is why I can't ask you for another chance, even though I want to, because I don't know how to prove I've changed, how to show you that I'd never lie to you again. Lila turned to face him on the bench. What if you didn't have to prove it? I don't understand. What if I'm not here because I want you to prove something? What if I'm here because I've already decided to trust you? Ronan's breath caught. Lila, let me finish. She held up a hand. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying I've forgotten what you did or that it doesn't still hurt sometimes. But I've spent 2 months running an orchard, organizing a cooperative, making decisions that affect not just me, but dozens of other families. And you know what I learned? What? That everybody lies sometimes. That everybody has parts of themselves they hide because they're afraid of being rejected. That the difference between a forgivable mistake and an unforgivable one isn't whether you lied. It's what you do after the truth comes out. She reached out and took his hand, her calluses pressing against his. You could have disappeared. You could have stayed Ronan Hale in your comfortable estate and never thought about me again. Instead, you paid off debts you didn't owe, gave me ownership of land that should have been mine anyway, and then respected my request for space even though it clearly cost you something. It cost me everything, Ronan admitted quietly. Then we're even, because trusting you again is costing me something too. It's costing me the safety of staying angry, the protection of keeping my distance. She squeezed his hand. But I'm willing to pay that cost. The question is, are you willing to be honest with me? Completely honest, no matter how uncomfortable it gets? Yes, the word came out without hesitation. Yes, I am. Then I need to ask you something, and I need a real answer. Lila's gray eyes were steady on his. Why did you really come to the orchard? Not the story about testing whether people could love you without your name. The real reason. Ronan took a deep breath. This was it. The moment to be completely honest or lose her forever. I was lonely, he said. I had everything anyone could want, and I was desperately lonely. Every relationship I'd ever had was transactional. Every friend wanted something from me. Every woman who showed interest was really interested in the Hale name and what it could give her. And I started to wonder if the problem was me, if there was something fundamentally unlovable about who I actually was, underneath all the wealth and status. So you stripped it all away to find out. Yes, but it was selfish. I was using you and your situation to answer a question about myself, without considering what it would cost you if you found out. He turned his hand in hers, lacing their fingers together. And then I got to know you, and it stopped being about me. It became about watching you carry impossible weight with grace, about learning from someone who understood work in a way I never had, about falling in love with the most remarkable person I'd ever met. And when you realized that, I panicked, because I knew if I told you the truth, you'd hate me, and I wasn't ready to lose you. Ronan looked down at their joined hands. So I kept lying, kept pretending, kept telling myself I'd find the right moment to come clean, but there is no right moment for that kind of confession. Lila was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You're right, there isn't, which is why I appreciate that you're being honest now. Does that mean? It means I'm willing to try. She stood, pulling him up with her, not to go back to what we had before because that was built on a lie, but to build something new, something honest. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but I'm not offering it because you deserve it. I'm offering it because I want to. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since the truth came out. Besides, I could use someone with your resources helping to expand the cooperative. We're planning to build a shared storage facility, and the costs are significant. Ronan laughed, surprised by the sudden shift. You're here for business advice? I'm here for a lot of things. Business advice is one of them. She started walking back toward the house, still holding his hand. I'm also here because I missed you, the real you, underneath all the pretense, the man who asked questions instead of giving orders, who admitted when he didn't know something, who stood up to my father even though he had no authority to do so. That was Cal. No, that was you. Cal was just the name you were using. She stopped and turned to face him. You're not two different people, Ronan. You're one person who is trying to figure out who he wanted to be. And I hope, you've figured that out now. I have. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I want to be someone who earns respect instead of demanding it. Someone who works alongside people instead of managing them from a distance. Someone who's honest, even when it's hard. That's a good start. Lila's expression softened. But I need something else from you too. Anything. I need you to understand that I'm not going to be your project. I don't need you to fix my problems or save me from difficult situations. I need you to be my partner, someone who respects that I can handle things myself, but is there when I ask for help. I can do that. Can you? Because wealthy men aren't usually very good at stepping back and letting women make their own decisions. Ronan thought about that, about his instinct to solve problems with money, to take control of situations, to manage instead of collaborate. It was going to be a challenge, changing those patterns. But Lila was worth the challenge. I'll make mistakes, he admitted. I'll probably overstep sometimes, offer help when you don't want it, try to fix things that aren't mine to fix. But I'll listen when you call me on it, and I'll keep trying to do better. That's all I'm asking. She leaned in and kissed him, brief and soft, for you to keep trying. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Ronan felt something shift inside him, a lightness he hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't the neat, tidy ending he might have hoped for. There were still questions to answer, still trust to rebuild, still patterns to break. But it was real, and that made it worth more than any fantasy. Garrett was waiting on the front steps, trying poorly to hide his curiosity. I take it your conversation went well? He said. Well enough, Lila answered. I'm going to need a place to stay for a few days. Ronan and I have a lot to discuss, and I'd rather not spend all my time riding back and forth. We have plenty of guest rooms, Ronan said quickly. Of course you do. Lila looked around at the sprawling estate, the manicured grounds, the obvious wealth. This is going to take some getting used to. We don't have to stay here, Ronan offered. No. I need to see this part of your life too. Need to understand who you are when you're not pretending to be a drifter. She squeezed his hand. Honesty goes both ways, remember? I want to know all of you, not just the parts you think I'll approve of. Over the next 3 days, they talked. About everything. Ronan showed her the business he ran, introduced her to the people who worked for him, explained the decisions he made and why he made them. Lila asked hard questions, challenged his assumptions, pointed out places where his privilege had blinded him to consequences. It was uncomfortable. It was necessary. And somewhere in those conversations, they found a way forward. I need to go back to the orchard, Lila said on the 4th morning, sitting across from Ronan at breakfast. Harvest season is ending, but there's winter preparation to do, and the cooperative is meeting next week to finalize the storage facility plans. I understand. But I'd like you to visit, in a few weeks maybe. Come see what we've built. She paused. As yourself this time, not as Cal. I'd like that. And Ronan? She set down her teacup. I've been thinking about what comes next, for us. So have I. I'm not moving here. The orchard is mine, and I'm not giving that up. I wouldn't ask you to. But I also don't want a relationship where we only see each other a few times a year. That's not enough. Ronan had been thinking about this too. What if I split my time? Spend part of the year here managing the estate, part of the year at the orchard helping with the work? Lila raised an eyebrow. You'd do that? I learned more in 2 months of working beside you than I did in years of managing from a distance. And besides, he reached across the table to take her hand. I'd rather be with you in a barn than alone in a mansion. That's very romantic, but romantic doesn't pick apples or fix fences. No, but I do, or at least I'm learning to. He smiled. I'm not expecting it to be easy, but I think it'll be worth it. Lila studied him, and he could see her calculating, weighing possibilities. We'd have to figure out the logistics, how to make it work practically. We will, together. And if it doesn't work, if we try this and realize we're too different, want different things, then we'll deal with that honestly, too. Ronan stood and walked around the table, kneeling beside her chair. But I'd like to try. I'd like to build something real with you, Lila, not based on who I pretended to be, but on who we actually are. She cupped his face in her hands, her calloused palms rough against his cheeks. You hurt me, Ronan, badly. And I need you to understand that trust isn't something you earn back quickly. I know, but I also believe people can change, and I believe you're trying to. She kissed him, and this time it was deeper, carrying the weight of everything they'd been through. So yes, let's try. 6 months later, Ronan stood in the eastern section of the Mercer orchard, pruning shears in hand, sweat on his brow, despite the cool spring air. Lila was 2 trees over, working with the easy efficiency of someone who'd been doing this her entire life. You're getting better at that, she called out. Only took me a year of practice. Some people are slow learners. He threw an apple core at her. She caught it and threw it back, laughing. The orchard had changed in the months since that conversation at his estate. The cooperative storage facility was complete, providing space for multiple orchards to process and store their yields. New contracts had been secured, prices had stabilized, and the small farmers who'd been struggling under Hartwell's monopoly were finally seeing profits. Lila had been at the center of all of it, and watching her work had been a revelation. She was brilliant at organization, at seeing connections others missed, at building consensus among people with competing interests. The cooperative had officially elected her as their coordinator, a paid position that gave her financial stability beyond just the orchard's yields. She didn't need Ronan's money, didn't need his name or his connections, but she chose to be with him anyway, and that meant everything. I got a letter from Garrett this morning, Ronan said, climbing down from the ladder. He wants to know when I'm coming back to the estate. What did you tell him? That I'll be there in 2 weeks for the quarterly meetings, and then I'm coming back here for the summer harvest. Lila set down her basket and walked over to him. Your business partners must think you've lost your mind. Some of them, yes. Others are starting to see the value in being more hands-on with operations. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. And I don't care what they think anyway. Liar. You care a little, maybe a little, he smiled, but not as much as I care about this. This? She gestured at the orchard. This, us, building something that matters instead of just managing inherited wealth. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by trees that were just beginning to show the first signs of new growth. The orchard would always require work. There was no finish line, no point where they could declare it complete and move on. But that was the beauty of it. The work itself was the point. I love you, Ronan said quietly. Not because you're convenient or beneficial or connected to the right people. Just because you're you. I love you too, Lila replied, even though you're still terrible at pruning. I'm improving. Marginally. He kissed her properly this time, and she leaned into it, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. Come on, she said, picking up her basket. We have another 20 trees to finish before sunset. Yes, ma'am. They worked side by side as the afternoon stretched into evening, 2 people who'd found each other in unlikely circumstances and chosen to build something real, despite every reason not to. The orchard around them was thriving, not perfect, never perfect, but alive and growing and producing fruit that would feed hundreds of families. It wasn't the life Ronan had been born into. It wasn't the life Lila had expected, but it was theirs, earned through honesty and hard work, and a willingness to keep trying even when things got difficult. And as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ronan realized he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not someone to love him despite who he was, but someone to love him because of it. Flaws, mistakes, and all. The question he'd asked at the start, whether anyone could love him without his name, had been the wrong question. The real question was whether he could love himself enough to be honest about who he was. And with Lila beside him, working the land her mother had left her, building a future they chose together, he was learning that the answer was yes. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but honestly, which was all that really mattered.